thank you all for coming today. We have the pleasure of having Ryan Holiday here at Google to talk to us. I'll give you guys a quick intro to who Ryan is. Ryan Holiday is a media strategist and prominent writer on strategy and business. After dropping out of college at 19 to apprentice under Ryan Green, author of The 48 Laws of Power and other bestsellers, he went on to advise many best-selling authors like Tim Ferriss and multi-platinum musicians. He was a media strategist for Tucker Max, another best-selling author, and he's the director of marketing at American Apparel, where he had to deal with everything from media hype to lawsuits to scandals. His campaigns and strategies for handling good and bad situations have been used in case studies by Twitter, YouTube, and Google, and written about in Ad Age, The New York Times, and Fast Company. His latest book, The Obstacle is the Way, The Timeless Art of Turning Trials into Triumph, was released by Penguin on May 1st. He's also the best-selling author of Trust Me, I'm Lying, and Growth Hacker Marketing. He's currently an editor-at-large at the New York Observer and contributes to Thought Catalog from his home in Austin, Texas. Please join me in giving Ryan Holiday a warm welcome. Ryan, thanks a lot for coming to speak at Google. There's a bunch of fun topics I want to delve into, but like learning, media strategy, philosophy, reading, writing. But before we do all that, can you just walk us through, real quick, like to how you got to where you are now, and how you got started with everything?
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of a long, confusing story, but I was in college. I went to UC Riverside, which is like an hour from here. And I was contributing to this, to the student newspaper. And so I thought I would use this as an excuse to like meet all the people that I wanted to meet. So I ended up writing an article about this guy. His name was Tucker Max, who was like a famous blogger at the time. We sort of struck up this friendship from the article. Then he put out his first book. I was like an intern for that. And that was it was just some sort of random thing that happened, and that book ended up becoming one of the first blogs to become a best-selling book. It sold something like 2 million copies worldwide now. It launched this sort of whole male-centric literary genre, which was very unexpected. But so I sort of saw how this like blogging and publishing was changing the book industry. I ended up working with another author through Tucker, who's named Robert Greene, he actually lives here in LA. He wrote The 48 Laws of Power. So I was doing this publishing stuff, and then it happens that Robert is on the board of directors for American Apparel. So I started there as sort of like a consultant in 2007 maybe. And then I ended up building a marketing department there, and I've been there ever since. And then I wrote my first book in 2011, which is sort of an expose about the media industry from my experiences of working with relatively controversial or unusual people. And then, obviously my experiences with publishing and writing as well.
Nice, that's cool. You're obviously really young and you've accomplished a ton of stuff already. You've had big responsibilities at American Apparel. You've dealt with a lot of challenges there. And you already have 3 books out. Is there something you attribute your success to?
Not really. I mean, I guess what I found, that I have this weird thing where I think like if you do one thing, you can be like really good at that one thing. If you do 2 things, it's hard to be good at those 2 things. But if you do like a bunch of things that are all somewhat related, they kind of like fuel into each other. So it's like I was working for these authors and I was learning how blogging works, which turned around and became very relevant at American Apparel. But there I'm learning other things about like ad buying and media and stuff like that. And then, since I'm working with the authors, I'm learning how books get made. So all the things are sort of this series of like concentric circles that sort of all add to each other. So for me, it's not like I did one thing and I dedicated myself totally to that, and then I did another thing, and then I did another thing. It was like all sort of simultaneous. There was one period where I had basically like 3 full-time jobs. Which was not exactly a fun experience, but it sort of compressed a period of learning that would have normally taken like years into like 1 or 2 years, where I just learned so much that then I could experiment and do things when I took some of that stuff off my plate.
Got it. And I know you've talked before about the role of mentors. I was curious to hear about how in the past you've set up those sorts of relationships where you were able to learn from people like Robert Greene and others.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the problems with mentorships is people think it's this like very formal relationship. Like I say now that like I was an apprentice under Robert, but like that's just like a word that gets attributed to a relationship after it's mostly wound down. You know, it was he needed a research assistant. I volunteered to be that research assistant, and then it slowly grew into a very beneficial relationship for myself, and then obviously, hopefully, for him as well. So, like when I get young kids that email me that want to talk about like they're like, oh, will you be my mentor? It's like that sounds like very weird. Like who would say that? And I think Sheryl Sandberg was talking about that in Lean In. She was like, people think it's like you get like anointed, and that's not really how it works. It's just like you don't walk up to someone and say like, will you be my girlfriend or boyfriend? It's like, no, you meet and then a relationship blossoms over time. So the mentorships that I've had started as very informal or even sort of random, and then based on like a mutual exchange of value grew over time into being something. And there's obviously a bunch of different traits that are important to a good mentor-mentee relationship, or whatever the other word is for that. But it's something that you have to want, and you have to sort of build into existence rather than like it's not a scheduled thing, it's not a formal thing, it's just something that happens.
Got it. And besides these mentors, what are other places that you've turned to in the past for learning or for basically figuring things out as you went along?
I mean, books obviously are very important. I read a lot. I try to read like 2 or 3 books a week. And for me, what I realized very early on, and it's a little bit clear for me because I work in book publishing and I'm a writer, but like I consider reading to be like part of my job. So like, and that was actually somewhat weird when I was working full time in American Apparel. It's like I would want to sit there and like read a book, but you like can't do that at an office, But so now I work from home, so I can sort of I can arrange my day in a way that like appearances matter a little bit less. But I think, reading, like what I say is like, okay, look, chances are whatever problem you're going through right now, someone else went through before you, and they probably wrote it down. And so like books are the way that we access that knowledge. And if you're not availing yourself to it, you're going to learn a lot of things the hard way when you don't necessarily need to. So I consider like reading to be like part of my job and part of what's accelerated what I've been able to accomplish. So it's like when people are like, oh, how do you have time? How do you have so much time to read? It's like, well, how do you have time to sleep? And how do you have time to eat and go to work? Like, that's just what you do. It's not like this extra luxury that I squeeze in when I'm on vacation.
Got it. That was going to be one of my questions. How do you have so much time to read? So
there's no secret. And like, I don't read fast. Like, I think a lot of people think that people who read a lot must be like speed readers, and so they focus on that. It's like, no, people who read a lot just spend a lot of time reading because it's important to them. And that's sort of the distinction that I made.
Got it. No, that's helpful. We'll get back to the reading thing in a little bit. I wanted to ask you a bit more about media strategy stuff. I don't know how many people in the audience have read either of your first 2 books, so I just wanted to touch on some of those topics briefly. Was media and marketing sort of always a world that was compelling to you, and sort of how did you get into that?
Well, I really wanted to be a writer, and I wanted to be around writers, but I was 19 years old, so I had nothing to contribute there. But I did sort of understand how the internet worked, and I saw how blogs are sort of becoming very influential to people who are my age. So I thought like, oh, if I want to work for these authors, maybe that's like something that I can bring to the table. So I think that's a mistake that a lot of writers make. I mean, that might not be super relevant to everyone here, but writers, like I find writing to be easy. It's like having something to say that's far more rare. Like everyone has the ability to string a sentence together. And if you have something compelling that you need to say, it doesn't really matter how well the sentence is written, right? So for me, it was about like I wanted to be around writers, but then I also knew that I had to have like experiences and do things and learn things that would make my writing interesting. So Trust Me, I'm Lying was like the first thing that I came up with that was the first instance where I thought like, I have something to say here that no one else has said, because I understand something or I've seen something that maybe not everyone has seen, and this book would be a way for me to communicate that. So it was like, I always wanted to do it. I was just waiting for sort of the pitch that I wanted to swing at.
Okay, got it. And in terms of that first book, what in your mind, like, what are the biggest like takeaways or lessons that you've learned from that, or that you learned that created that book, and that you've later used to help promote a lot of the musicians and authors you've worked with?
So basically, Trust Me, I'm Lying is sort of an expose of the modern media system. But my premise is that when the economics of a medium change from subscription-based content to what I would call one-off content, right? Like, we don't read the Huffington Post, we read articles from the Huffington Post or articles from the New York Times. That means that all these articles are competing against each other for a finite amount of attention. And so that competition, multiplied millions of times over, exaggerates and distorts the information that's being conveyed. Like a newspaper is a buyer's market, right? Like, they're deciding what content is going to go in the however many number of pages they're publishing that day. Business Insider or Gawker or whatever, they can publish an infinite amount. So they're sort of looking to manufacture and create as much content as possible, and they have a direct financial incentive to do so. And so that very quickly puts you at odds with the truth or reality in a lot of ways. Like, in one of my talks, I have this job ad from the Washington, and this started with blogs, but it's turned the entire media system over. Like, I have this job ad I like from the Washington Post where they're looking for a blogger to post like 12 times a day. And so it's like, you can see how like after like 3 or 4 posts, it's like you're starting to run out of stuff to talk about, or you're starting to have to talk about things that have already been talked about and then put your own spin on them. And then because no one is like subscribing to that site, especially with things like RSS readers declining, the only way that people are going to see that article is whether it spreads on Twitter or it spreads on Facebook. And SEO is obviously important too. But basically that means that unless it's sort of hitting these various social triggers, it's not going to be seen. And so that creates what I call toxic incentives.
Yeah, and people trying to like grab you with headlines and really weird
yeah, basically it means the media is trying to sell something to you rather than trying to literally sell you something that is so good that you would pay for it, And so because of that, it creates, one, it turns a lot of journalists into, it adds a level of manipulation to the profession of journalism, and then it also creates certain opportunities for marketers to wield influence and direct the news. And so the book is sort of trying to rip back the curtain and show how that works.
Got it. Do you think anything has changed since the publication of your book? Have things gotten worse?
Yeah, definitely worse. So I wrote it in 2011. It was published in mid 2012. Then I did a updated paperback last year. But like when I wrote those, like Upworthy didn't really exist. So, and that's and BuzzFeed was not the behemoth that it now is. And so like I was talking about some of the snark and negativity that was very pervasive in the media at the time, and that's still a problem. And now you're sort of on the other side. I think you're seeing this very artificial positivity. It's like, this kid was dancing at a talent show and you'll never guess what happened next. And it's like, it's just some weird kid dancing. Like it's not like this mind-blowing stuff, right? But that now what tends to get clicks on Facebook, like the way that the Facebook algorithm favors certain stories determines the content that, like there's entire businesses. Upworthy is basically an entire multi-million-dollar business designed to game Facebook's social algorithm in the way that like demand media was created exclusively to game SEO. And so you're seeing just massive amounts of content designed essentially to manipulate us. And we know this, and yet we share them all anyway. And it replaces, like, the reality is most things are not either super negative or super positive. They're somewhere in the middle, and they're complicated and confusing, but that doesn't distill itself well into a headline or a 3-minute video. And so you see so much content created along those lines.
Cool. Let's talk about philosophy and Stoicism a little bit. That's the subject of the newest book. What's your view on philosophy? How should people learn it and use it?
Well, I definitely didn't write a philosophy book because I know that when people hear that, they're like, I don't want to read that. That sounds super boring. So, uh, Stoicism, like philosophy before the modern university was designed to help people live good lives. Now it's mostly pretentious, confusing, and complicated academic debates, right? So I focus on Stoicism, specifically on Marcus Aurelius, who is, at the time of writing his book Meditations, which mine is partially based on, is this totally unique historical figure. It's like you have a guy who's he's the guy in Gladiator, if you don't know. But he's the most powerful man in the world, right? He has unlimited wealth. He's the head of the most powerful army on earth. He's the head of the most powerful empire on earth. He's literally worshipped as a god while he's alive, right? And yet every night he sits down and he writes in this little journal about like how he can be better and more like just and honorable and fair and kind and patient and all these things. And then that document survives, and for 2,000 years, successful people have been reading it and interpreting it and basing their lives on it. To me, that's what philosophy is. And what's really cool about Stoicism, and well, we could talk about Stoicism a little bit more in a minute, but Stoicism, the three most prominent Stoics are Marcus Aurelius, who I just said was the emperor, Epictetus, who was a former slave, so you have the most powerful man in the world and then a totally powerless man, and then you have Seneca, who is one of the most famous sort of businessmen and political advisors in his lifetime. To me, that says that it's this philosophy for extreme success and extreme adversity for people who are actually out in the world doing things. It's not questions about stuff you don't care about. It's like, how do you deal with getting angry or getting jealous or getting discouraged or or wanting to break the rules about something. How do you actually deal with those practical issues in life? That's what Stoicism is about.
Got it. Are there like a handful of lessons that you apply, that you see yourself applying like on a daily basis that come from that philosophy or that help you in certain situations?
Yeah, sure. Well, the big one is the one that I based. So the book is based on a quote from Marcus Aurelius. There's a longer quote, but the short version of it is, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." So I read that when I was 19 years old, and it went way over my head. But as I've gotten older, and as I wrote this book, I started to understand sort of what that means. It's this formula for optimism that essentially says, like, look, you don't control what happens to you. You control how you respond to that thing, and you may as well respond well. So that's a big one. The Stoics have this idea where they say, like, there is no good or bad. There is only perception. I think that's really important. Stoics had an idea, what they called amor fati, which is a sort of love of everything that happens to you. So there's basically Stoicism. If you picked up any of the Stoic texts right now, it would just be like short sentences, almost like Zen-like sentences about how to just deal with life. And that's what I take from it. And every time you read it and look at it, you take something different based on what you're dealing with, like right now.
Got it. You mentioned Seneca, who was like one of the wealthiest people at his time. I think like a lot of people like nowadays think Stoicism is like sort of either not feeling emotion or forgoing like all of your like worldly possessions and not being materialistic. But this guy was super wealthy,
Yeah.
and he was he really cared about a lot of these ideas. So
Yeah.
how do you reconcile those things?
Sure. Well, one of the saddest parts of philosophy is that Stoicism is known as being the philosophy of not having emotions, and then Epicureanism is known as being the philosophy of like loving luxury and whatever. And those in actuality, both schools were about essentially the opposite of whatever their modern reputation is. And it's very unfortunate. I think it turns a lot of people off. But what Seneca is saying is, he's not, and all the Stoics, they're not saying like you can't be wealthy, you can't be successful, you can't go out and do things. What they're saying is that you can't be dependent on these things. Like he's saying, like wealth is nice if you have it, but if you make your personal happiness dependent on having this money, that's bad because it's not in your control, right? The economy could melt down at any moment, or your house could burn down, or you could lose your job. And if you have equated wealth with personal happiness, now your personal happiness is outside of your control. And so Stoicism is about control in that sense. How do you make the distinction between externals and internals and focus most of your energy on internals? Having externals is nice, but sort of what they would say is that understand that they're yours in trust, which means that they could leave you at any moment. And a lot of the Stoic exercises are sort of about practicing not having those things. So Seneca was famous. One day a month he would practice being poor. So he would wear like crappy clothes, and he would like not eat at his house, and he would sleep outside, and he would just, I mean, it's I think more now like a metaphor than anything else. But the idea is like, we're so afraid of these things, so we don't think about them, and therefore we're not prepared for them, and then it makes them much scarier, and we dread them that much more, even though if you looked at it really objectively, it's really not that bad.
Right, that makes a lot of sense. Back to the subject of reading, which you brought up before. For those of you who don't know, sort of as Ryan mentioned, he's an extremely avid reader. His collection of books is enormous, and he has like over 15,000 people who subscribe to his monthly reading suggestion newsletter, which I follow and appreciate. So I'm curious to hear a little bit more about your perspective on reading and books and the purpose they serve for you. Have you always been reading a ton of stuff, or did that sort of develop all of a sudden?
Yeah, I mean, I've always been reading a lot. I grew up reading a lot. In college, I don't know, I would take like cues from the professor, and then I would read just like everything that they suggested, or I would ask any smart person that I would interact with in any way if they had any book advice. So weirdly, I got introduced to Stoicism because when I was in college, I got invited to this conference that was put on by Trojan Condoms, of all things. They had a conference in West Hollywood for like college journalists, and then the moderator of this like little session was Dr. Drew, who's host of Loveline, and he has that show on HLN now. And so I was like, we were leaving, and I was like, hey, like, would you recommend any books? And he recommended Epictetus, who's one of the other Stoics. And so that sort of chance encounter like introduced me to a book that I spent $15 on, and it totally changed my life in like dramatic way and put me on the path that I'm on now. And so I'm sort of the mind that it's like, ask people which books change their life, read those books and see what you can get out of them, and then let them sort of like the way I find books to read is I ask people what they like, and then I try to read one book from every book that I read. So I flip to the bibliography and I see like anything that sounds interesting, or I'll just pick something mentioned during the text. So I kind of have these chains where it's like I read this, and then that takes me to this, and then that takes me to some other thing.
Cool. How do you organize yourself and your and what you read? I know you've written about the commonplace book system. Maybe you can talk about that as well for a second.
Yeah. So I only read physical books. I know that makes me somewhat anachronistic now, but I read only physical books, and then I write notes in them while I'm reading, and I fold the pages, and then I learned this system when I was researching for Robert. This is the system that he used, so I had to learn that system and then participate in that system. But my system is I read the books, I take notes, I fold the pages, and I wait like a week or two, and I go back through the book and I transfer any quotes or stories or facts that I mark down to 4x6 note cards, and then I organize those note cards. I have a box in my house that's organized by themes. So, and I do this when I'm just reading generally, but if I'm researching for a book, like The Obstacle is the Way, I think it's 3 parts, and then each part is like 10 chapters. So my box for that book was, was actually 5 sections, 3, and then, an intro and a conclusion. And then each section had 10 file dividers, and then probably, 20 to 30 note cards per section, sometimes 200 note cards per section. And then when I would sit down to write, I take the note cards out, and I sit down and I, like if I'm writing part 2, chapter 6, and I'm traveling, I'm just taking, all I have to take with me is those note cards. And that's got like quotes and stories, and maybe I saw a word that I liked and I want to use that word. So weirdly, like the book only took me The book probably took me 3 months to write. Like the first draft took 3 months, but I researched for it for 7 years.
Right. Now, we're obviously at Google, and here we do a lot of work towards digitizing things and trying to put all the world's information online and make it searchable, accessible, all that
I've been
stuff.
thinking about hiring someone on TaskRabbit to scan them all, but I'm so nervous. So last year my house got broken into, and the first thing I thought about was like, oh my God, like I hope they didn't take my note cards. I'm so screwed if they take my note cards. And they didn't. Like it was totally untouched. I was like, oh, thank God. So as I'm cleaning up my office, because they basically destroyed everything. I'm cleaning up the office. I set the box like on like a corner, and then I forget about it, and I like 10 minutes later I walk into it and it just all the cards everywhere.
Oh, shoot.
So I know I need to digitize it at some point, but it's literally like thousands and thousands of note cards, some of which have totally illegible handwriting, so I'm not sure. I may just have to stick with the system until I die or something.
I mean, you could do for backup, obviously.
Yeah.
Those sorts of scenarios. But I was just curious to hear, like, you love paper and you love the physical element of it. Can you talk a little bit about that? Like, what caused you to be?
Well, I think there's two things there. One, I think what a lot of people miss about books when they're like making e-readers and ebooks and stuff is they forget that a book is a piece of technology. And at one point, it was a pretty innovative piece of technology. It sort of blew everyone's mind when it came out. But an analogy might be like, when you watch like science fiction movies, they have all these like cool doors, like the doors like break open in the middle, or like they do, and then like we live in the future comparatively, right? And we still have like just metal doors, right? Because like a door is a really good piece of technology in terms of it being simple and effective and more or less does what we need it to do, right? And I think a book is a similar piece of technology. Like in terms of sitting down and reading something that you're probably only going to read one time, a book is, for $15, a book is a pretty good version of that. And so for most people, they don't pick up a physical book and they're like, I hate this. It's just not working for me. Like, and in fact, they're like, people love books, right? So I think that's something that people miss, and I think that's something that's going to stick with us for a long time. It's a great piece of technology, all things considered. People also forget that in publishing, like it's so cheap to print a physical book that the margins are like, it costs like $2 to print a physical book. So the margins are, switching to ebooks is not that big of a savings for most people. But then in terms of like the note cards and stuff, I think it's really important for two reasons. One, having to physically transfer the stuff. So if I'm just reading an ebook and then I'm transferring stuff to Evernote, like I'm not having to put in any effort, or I'm not having to run that content through my mind again. And so I would fear that if I did that, I would just have an enormous like Evernote file or Google Doc filled with things that I have no idea are actually there. Like if I'm writing something, often I'll like think of a note card that I know that I wrote, and it will be a total pain to go find, but the only reason I know it exists is because I physically wrote it down, and I remember having to write down like 6 sentences on a note card, and I remember that, and that's important. But then like when you're crafting a book, being able to move things around like right in front of you or lay them out is, I think, very underrated. Mm-hmm. A lot of authors that I know, or aspiring authors more often than not, think that writing a book is just like, oh, I'm going to sit down and then see where it takes me. That's like a great way to write a bunch of stuff that you can't use. So for me, like organizing it and having it all sketched out before I start, and being able to, it's like, oh, I'm going to move this over here, or like, actually, I didn't use this quote in section 1, now I can put it over here in section 3, is very important. And I don't know what the technological replacement for that would be.
Got it. Are there any authors you're reading right now that you want to throw out or that you recommend?
Any books that I'm reading?
Or just finished recently?
Trying to think, what have I read? Yeah, I just read this book called Evening Empire, which is by, it's a fiction book. It was really interesting. It was like the author's father was killed. This is a true story. The author's father was assassinated by the mob in like the 70s when he was like 5 years old, and he wrote like an investigative book about his father's own murder that I thought was really interesting. I tend to read all over the place. So like I'm reading a book about the Civil War one day, and then I'm reading a book about technology, and then I'm reading a book of fiction. So I keep the reading list, and I only recommend books that I read that I liked. I read a lot of books that I think like aren't good enough to recommend, but I do that once a month, and that's sort of everything that I've been reading in that period.
Got it. Besides reading, are there other sort of rituals or things that are part of your daily life that help towards writing or towards any of the marketing stuff?
I mean, I think exercise is very important to the creative process. I try to either run, I run or swim almost, run, swim, or I do CrossFit every day. And that's very important. I tend to have like creative breakthroughs when I've stopped working on something and I've went to do something else, which is cool. You were showing me the gym earlier. I think that's probably why that's there. It's like you can work and work and work on a problem, and then you stop, and then when you're thinking about something else, that sort of magically comes together in your mind. So I think that's important. Yeah, I don't know.
Cool. You mentioned about writing. You mentioned a little bit about like the balance between like technique and style versus content, and you lean more heavily towards the content side. I guess is it a common mistake that you see that other people don't really have interesting messages to say?
Well, I just think it's sad that most writers think they have to go get like an MFA. They have to go pay like 80 grand to get an MFA, which doesn't so you're just focusing on the craft part, and the craft is certainly important, but like just think about all the fascinating memoirs that have been written by people who are like essentially illiterate, right? Or like just dumb as shit, right? Like they wrote like fascinating memoirs because they lived interesting lives. And I think you're far better off focusing on having something to say than being really good at saying it, you know? Obviously there's some books that are just like amazing, beautiful pieces of writing, and like The Great Gatsby is like, I think an example, like people go like, this is some of the best writing ever done in the English language. But it's also, one, a super compelling story written by someone who was being deeply critical and felt very compelled to say something about an entire generation of people. And so like, I would say that The Great Gatsby could be 50% worse from a writing standpoint and might still be worth reading. And so I just think like, or even when you look at people who are not professional writers, like when you go on like Medium or something, the best posts are like from people who have a particularly unique or unexpected perspective about something. And so that's what I think people should focus on from their writing. Yeah.
Cool. Before we switch to audience Q&A, just wanted to ask you about the roadmap going forward. What are you planning on working on next? Any upcoming goals, projects?
I mean, this is 3 books in 3 years for me, so I'm pretty exhausted. But I'm thinking about what the next book will be probably, and then I'm gonna hopefully take some time off because I'm very tired. But yeah, keep doing what I'm doing. I have a marketing company. I still work with American Apparel. This is what, there's no like thing that I want to do next, because like this is what I wanted to do.
Cool.
Yeah.
That's great. I can open it up to audience Q&A. I'll walk over to you guys so you get recorded. Yeah.
That's so weird.
Yeah.
Talking to his hip microphone, please.
Hello. Okay, I have 43 questions.
Is it 43 questions or a 43-part question?
No, actually, I guess it's kind of a sign of how great this talk was or is that. It's like, oh, I want to ask that, and I was asking, why doesn't this guy ask that question and that follow up? And so I'll choose maybe 1 or 2. The first one, when Max asked you about how did you come by, kind of get to the point of being here today, you kind of started at 19, as you became you started working with that author. But I'd like to kind of take it a little bit. The thing that strikes me most, and I'm sure a lot of people here, there's like, you give out a sense of like this relentless, sharp focus that, all these kids that supposedly, still live with their parents at 35 probably don't display. And I'd like you to talk a little bit about, it's like all of the rest of the stuff stems from that. You had like
Sure.
this huge drive, and then you figured out how to. If you can
Yeah.
talk about that.
No, that's interesting. I've always been sort of a very intense person, I would say. Very sort of, I think there's sort of an intensity mixed with a sort of introvertedness, which works well for what I do, because it forces you to sort of go internal and like sort of nagging things that you're just focused on until you can get them to make sense. So I guess it's always been that way for me. But I sort of start with 19 because up until that point, I was just like I guess I was just a normal college student that got a series of lucky breaks that introduced me to people that taught me a lot. But I don't know, like my childhood was pretty unremarkable. There wasn't like, it wasn't like Steve Jobs growing up next to like the dude who created Hewlett Packard or whatever. There was no thing like that. It was just in college I met some people and started down this path, and I've always been very intense about it.
There's nothing during high school or during earlier schooling that kind of shows a difference in focus between you and.
No, I don't think so. I mean, I've thought a lot about it, but there's nothing there. I wish there was. It would make it easier to explain things.
I guess I have maybe two questions, but one I think is quick. Growing up, you said you had a lifelong obsession with reading.
Yeah.
Was there like any kind of shift in genre or book that drew you in? Did you always love biographies or historical or fiction or escapist fantasy or whatever?
I think what my parents did pretty early on is they gave me like my parents, my dad was a police officer, my mom was like a school principal, but they were just very, they were like educated, but like civil servant types. So like they gave me their favorite books, which just happened to be the books that they'd read in high school and college, but they gave them to me like pretty early. So it was like by the time I got to like middle school and high school, I'd already read all those books. So then it was like, what comes after that? So I think I'm just a testament to having a the compounding returns that come from having an early start. That's the only, I mean, I thought a lot about it, and there was no like, oh, I got introduced to this book and it changed my life, or I saw this person talk and it changed everything. There wasn't really like that. It was just, I was reading Lord of the Flies in 4th grade or 5th grade or something when I should have been reading it in freshman year of high school, and so that allowed me to start asking questions and seeing things maybe a little bit early.
Sure. And
Yeah.
the second question is there a particular book or work that you really wish that you had done?
Is there a book I wish I'd written?
Yeah. If you read something and said, wow, I wish that was me.
I'm a big Nassim Nicholas Taleb fan, so I think The Black Swan is pretty amazing. I read this. One of the people in the book is Samuel Zemurray, who is the founder of United Fruit. He's not a good person, but there was a really interesting biography of him called "The Fish That Ate the Whale" that I liked a lot. That I probably wish that I'd written. I think if there's most of the books that I thought were amazing that I wish I'd written were probably like biographies, because I just can't wrap my head around writing like a 900-page book about someone, and not only writing it, but having like no factual errors and being able to sort of live inside this person and produce this. I don't know, just the mammoth size of that task is very impressive to me.
So you mentioned really at 19 you were interested / excited about blogging. And you sort of was charting a bit about sort of the arc of that,
Yeah.
maybe how it's maybe going down at this point in time, the lack of RSS feeds and what have you, and maybe it's turning into sort of advertising. I'm curious because you've connected in a great way blogging to how that's produced sort of more publishing opportunities. Is there a new technology today, or is there a technology front that you're excited about that kind of connects, if not in the same way, but has that sort of same feeling for you that blogging once did?
I don't know. Obviously, I think books are really exciting right now. I think you're seeing a lot of people do cool things in like audio. I think you're seeing cool stuff in audio right now, both like on podcasting and in audiobooks. It's never sort of been cheaper and easier to produce like professional quality stuff. And then with smartphones, now you can actually, smartphones and broadband, you can store this stuff really easily or access it easily. So I think audiobooks used to be the thing that you could only listen to in your car, and you had to have 9 CDs or whatever. And now it's like it's just one thing in iTunes or whatever, right? So I think that's interesting. But no, there's no like one technology that's like, oh, I love this. I think this is going to change everything. And that might just be because I'm a little, having seen that happen with blogging, I'm a little jaded. And I think that sort of, that one of my favorite writers is Evgeny Morozov, where he says that his sort of point is that technology just allows us to be more or less who we actually are. And so I've lost some of that idealism about like, oh, this is going to make everything so much better. It's like, no, you're going to see the same people doing the same things, just like you're seeing some of the, the same Hollywood economics now be applied to the people who are creating content on YouTube or whatever. It's all, at the end of the day, it's the same.
Thanks.
Hello, senor.
Yes.
Quick question. What's on your iPod right now?
I would prefer not to answer that question because I listen to terrible music. I usually my thing is that I listen to the same songs like over and over and over again. And then I throw them away after because I'm so sick of them and I'm so disgusted that I would have listened to this song 300 or 400 times.
But it helps though, right?
Yeah, of course. I think it's very good for like focusing. You sort of, the music becomes background noise. The music replaces the background noise, and then all that's left is like whatever you're working on.
Nice. I'll get your recommendations later.
Yeah.
You had a question?
I don't think you're going to like them.
2 questions. One is, when do you read? Do you ritualize your reading, like in the morning or a certain time, or do you just read whenever you feel like reading? Or
I'm more of like a binge reader. So I'll like, if I'm traveling, I'll read like a ton of books, and then if I'm home and I'm busy, I might not read anything for a couple days. So to me, it's more, I'll read whenever I have a chance, and I try to increase that by always like carrying a book around with me. So it's like, let's say I have to be here at 10:30, maybe I'm going to get here at 10:15 and like read before, like I'm going to try to squeeze reading in like little blocks like that.
what motivates you to put the effort to do all this? Like what drives that?
Yeah, and I call it a note card system. If you Google like my name and that, you can see it. I have pictures and I sketched it all out. But like this is my job. I mean, like I'm supposed to find, like when I write books, I need to have examples and stories and data to make my argument. So it's somewhat unfair in that I get paid to produce this system. So it's not like I'm doing it for fun because I'm very OCD. It's like this is what I have to do to produce what I produce. But even if I didn't, I would still probably do it. And I had a version of the system before I learned it, because I think it's important. I mean, one of the big sections that I have is just like life advice, just weird, interesting perspectives that I might not have thought of otherwise, that I might want to like go back to at some time if I'm like dealing with something or struggling with something.
Hi.
Hi.
Is there anything else that you can attribute to your success besides reading and social networking and obviously your drive? Is there anything?
Well, one would be luck, right? I think that's a lot of people don't. It's like, hey, I emailed this person, he got back to me, and then another good thing happened, and another good thing happened, and it sort of builds from there. So I think that's obviously very important, but that probably doesn't answer your question. So, I think, like when I've hired and fired my fair share of people, and I hire people, I'm very excited about them, and then they end up not working out because two things, they don't want it, right? And I seem to want them to be more successful than they want to be for themselves, and that's very frustrating. Or two, like they're just nuts. Like they just have so many, like especially young people, it's like they have so many issues, and it's like, look, I'm hiring you to do this job not because I want to be like involved in your personal life or I want to hear why you couldn't do this because of that. So for me it was like I wanted this stuff really bad, and I wasn't going to let any things that I was dealing with interfere with that. So it was like sort of not all business, but like when it was business, it was all business. And so I think taking care of yourself and being well-adjusted and centered and healthy is very important, and it's sort of part of the job as well.
Can you talk a little bit more? Sorry, it's another question.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit more about how you became director for the American Apparel?
Yeah, so this probably doesn't apply for any other company because American Apparel is a little bit unusual. But when I came in, American Apparel had no marketing department. There was like a person over, and the company was probably a, I don't know, $400 million a year company at this point, with 10,000 employees. But there was like a guy over here who kind of did some marketing stuff, and then someone over here who sent out, product placement, and then there was someone else over here who was designing ads. And part of what Dove brought me in to do was sort of organize that stuff. So I ended up building the marketing department. Like literally our office was at one point like a large storage closet for broken sewing machines at the factory. And so like we cleared that out, and that became the office. So I ended up becoming the director of marketing because it was like I built it and there wasn't anyone else to be in charge. And so it was this sort of totally random, accumulation of stuff that led to me being the director. But American Apparel is like a vertically integrated company. So like Dove, the owner and CEO, is like my only direct boss. So it probably couldn't have worked at Urban Outfitters or somewhere else. But it was it's been very cool. Like I got to learn so much on the job. You get to see. What I like about marketing is like you do this thing and then you can like see in real time whether it's like driving people to the store, or it's driving sales, or you put out this thing and then a reporter's calling you and they want to talk about it. So marketing has been very cool for me, and my role at American Apparel was about sort of creating some semblance of strategy behind that because it wasn't there before. It was just very scattered.
Sorry, it'd be my last question.
Whatever.
So in terms of marketing, would you say that you just attended a lot of conferences, and how you got into that in terms of social networking? Or?
I've definitely been to a lot of conferences. I could probably count on one hand with like half my fingers how many of those conferences I really got something out of. I think a lot of people focus on those things because it's like what everyone else is doing. And the conferences that I've gotten the most out of, that I've met the most people at, I was actually at a Google conference in London like 2 weeks ago called Google Create. That was very cool that I met all these people at. It was one of the best conferences I've probably ever been to. But it was like totally random, and most of the people were not talking about marketing. So I tend to find that it's going to the things that you don't know that much about that like you go to South by Southwest, it's like there's 250,000 other people there attending this conference. You're not going to get FaceTime with people. You're probably not going to learn that much. Everyone is there just as an excuse to party. Is that the place that you're going to get the most out of it? And is that worth a week of your life or whatever? So I try to think about attending the ones, I try to think about attending the ones that other people aren't attending. And then I've also found that if you're speaking so I would much rather speak at a conference than attend a conference, even if the one I'm speaking at is much less prestigious and much smaller than the one that I'm attending, because it sort of changes the dynamic and you have a different relationship with the people that you're meeting. I think it was, I went to this one like sort of private, I guess this is a good example. I went to this private conference, and Keith, I don't know if you know who Keith Ferrazzi is, but he wrote that book, Never Eat Alone. And he spoke, and I was talking to the host, and he was like, yeah, I invited Keith, and he said, he was like, hey, do you want to come? It's this thing at my house. And he was like, I'll come only if I can speak. And I was like, what? And he's like, he only goes to conferences he can speak at because of that exact thing, that it just changes the dynamic of how you meet people and how they perceive you and stuff like that. So that might be like a little trick.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, thank you so much, Ryan, for
Cool.
coming.
Thank you guys.